Can the Mind Be Quiet? Living, Learning, and Meditation. J. Krishnamurti, forward by Terence Stamp. Watkins Publishing, sharing wisdom since 1893. 89 to 93 Shepperton Road, London. Unit 11, Shepperton House. Interesting. Explorations with Krishnamurti. Along with Krishnamurti's public talks, his dialogues with leading 20th century thinkers such as Renee Weber, Iris Murdoch, Jonas Salk, David Bohm, and Huston Smith are well known. In between these hundreds of meetings, Krishnamurti was also available for private interviews and conversations with those who wished to meet him. These were not recorded and note-taking was discouraged. Compiled here are 60 such conversations, previously unpublished, recalled and written down by Krishnamurti in the late 1960s and early 1970s. They contain probing inquiries into such topics as the self and consciousness, the essential qualities of good education, and the meditative and religious mind. As with all of his writings, the style is direct, eschews rhetoric, and states deep truths as obvious and factual information available to any who will listen. The pieces also include Krishnamurti's much-loved descriptions of nature. The book is divided into 3 parts, representing far-reaching explorations into the areas of living, learning, and meditation, highlighting Krishnamurti's radical approach to each. I met Krishnamurti for the first time in Rome in 1968 while I was working on a movie with Federico Fellini, the great Italian director. I spoke no Italian, so he had given me an interpreter, who also happened to be his personal astrologer. One day she said to me, "You've been invited to a lunch with Krishnamurti." I said, "Who's Krishnamurti?" She then replied in a hushed voice, as if I should know, "Well, you know, he's Krishnamurti." I asked, "Okay, is he a film director?" No, she said, "he's a sage." Now, I was 27 and famous, but really I am just an East End spiv, and right then I was winging it. Okay, Google, what is a spiv?
Here's the definition of spiv: informal. A man, typically characterized by flashy dress, who makes a living by disreputable dealings.
The only sage that I knew of went in the stuffing that my mother made at home for our roast dinners. All the same, I was interested enough to go along to this lunch party. It was only years later that I found out how I actually came to be there. Fellini had an amazing script that he wanted to shoot. However, he was short of money, so he asked Vonda Scaravelli, the eminent yoga teacher and well-connected society figure, for assistance. She knew Krishnamurti, and Fellini asked to be introduced to him next time he was in Rome, thinking, I suppose, that he might provide some funding. A few months later, Krishnamurti was in town, and she arranged for them to meet. Hearing that he loved movies, Fellini cut together about 15 minutes of the rushes of the film that he and I were making. He then showed it to him to help break the ice, and apparently when the short film finished, Krishnamurti said, "I'd like to meet that boy," meaning me, which was why I was invited to lunch. When I arrived, the place was crowded, but I still ended up at a table opposite Krishnamurti himself. We didn't speak at all, but because I was staring at him, he continually lowered his eyes out of politeness. I remember thinking that I had never met anybody like that. It was very unusual. Then after the lunch, he was answering questions from the press people there, and his secretary, Elaine Nauda, came over to me and said, "Would you like to go for a walk with Krishnamurti?" I said yes. So he and I went out for this long walk around the suburbs of Rome. And not having had the nerve to speak with him during lunch, I suddenly couldn't stop chattering. At a certain point on the walk, we stopped and he put his hand on my arm and said, "Look at that tree." And I looked. It was a tree. I looked at him. He smiled. I smiled. We carried on walking. I carried on talking. 10 minutes later, he stopped me again and said, "Look at that cloud." And I looked again. Cloud. It wasn't special, not lit from within or anything like that. It was a cloud, that's all. On we went, and I kept talking. And that was my first meeting with Krishnaji. However, I was never the same after that meeting. Something shifted. He did something to me, which I understood years later. He used his presence to pause my own thinking, and something inside it started reaching back out towards me. From then on, every time I saw that he was giving a talk, I would try and go. And likewise, he would always try and make sure that I was invited. I often wouldn't really get what was being said, but unbeknownst to me, I was being refined. In later conversations, the same thing would happen. We would start off talking about material things like shirts and shoes, and yet a shift would occur. His tone of voice would not necessarily change, but something subtle would take place. I can only liken it to Cole Porter's lyric, "How strange the change from major to minor." It took me maybe 15 years to understand sayings like, "When the eagle flies, it leaves no mark," and "The observer is the observed." I might not have been sure about what he was saying, but there was always this shift. Terence Stamp. Oh, is that chapter 1 yet? Oh, that was the foreword. Okay. Part 1, Explorations into Living. We do not see, we do not hear. The north wind blew hard and cold, wiping away the fog, the smell of the town, the exhaust, and the foul air. The mountains were very clear. The air was brittle, sweeping everything before it, the dead and dying leaves. You could see very far to the gap between the islands, and you could almost see every bush and every leaf on the hill. That strange light that exists only in California was more penetrating than ever. You really should see these hills in this light, with the blue sky beyond them, and then you would know the extraordinary blue beauty of the land. The sun was on the sea, this morning one vast sheet of silver. It was good to look at the light of the water and let that light enter into your heart, and to live there with that light and nothing else, with no thought, without tomorrow or yesterday, and to let the north wind blow away all the inanities, the ugliness, the violence, and the stupidities that man has built into himself by his own thought and fear. Let all that be swept away and have that light and nothing else. You have often said, "Be nothing, completely destroy everything, the good and the bad, and withdraw into silence, into nothingness." Aren't you really teaching total annihilation of the ego and all the works of the ego? You are really saying to people, live a life of nothingness, and from that nothingness, act. This is what the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads say in their own way. Complete and total annihilation of the me, the ego, the superego. How is this to be done? Does it come about through meditation or through good work? Is it a reward for righteous behavior? How does it happen? And then it changes to italics. There are two kinds of action. One brings you reward, and the doing of it strengthens the ego, the me. The other kind of action, the action which you love to do, has no reward or punishment, and is not concerned with what the neighbor says, or with gods, or with the priests, or with belief. You do it because it is the only thing to do. You rejoice in the very doing of it, not for heaven or the avoidance of hell. You just do it, and in the very doing of it is the delight. This action is a freedom from society and has nothing whatsoever to do with morality. This action is from nothingness. When there is this, you can look at the world from that silence of nothingness. You ask how this happens. Thought can only go as far as its own distance and dimension, for it is tethered. Thought, however bright, clear, perceptive, is still part of the known, and the known is not that nothingness. Thought cannot destroy the known, for it is itself the already known. But thought must exercise itself to its fullest width and height, and see its own barren activity. Neither is it through organized meditation. For as long as there is the meditator, meditation is within the field of the known. What is important is the ending of the meditator. So it is not organized meditation with its systems, methods, and goals, nor is it the pursuit and refinement of thought. It is the clear eye that sees and the clear heart that hears. The hearing and seeing of the ego is one thing. The seeing and hearing without the ego is another. The one perverts and distorts, the other simply sees and hears. This hearing is from the silence of nothingness. The total denial is the total action. May I ask you, what actually is the action of that denial? Is it to see something in the mind that is false and to somehow say no to it? If it is, then there is something saying the no. That cannot be what you mean. So what is the quality of that denial? There is no me when you deny, because the me has already been denied. But to most of us, denial implies a seeing of something and a rejection of it. Denial is the seeing and the doing, not two separate things. But what is this doing that you speak of? I understand there has to be a seeing, a perception of something, but having seen that, what is this action? There is no action. The seeing itself is the denying. Do you mean that if you see something, there is no alternative, there is no wrong, there is no other than seeing? That's just it. We divide action from seeing, and we ask what the action is that comes about in the seeing. The seeing itself is action. There is no actor in the seeing. If there is an actor in the seeing, there is no seeing at all, and no hearing when there is one who hears. You seem to be describing a quality of seeing and hearing at a far more profound level than most human beings can imagine. I don't think it is so very profound. I think it's fairly clear and simple. Hearing or seeing without the observer, without the one who hears and translates, just the act of seeing and listening and nothing else. But I may suggest that for most of us, the act of seeing is hedged about by the limitations of the person. It's as though you are saying that in order to sweep all that away, one must see, and we do not see because we are confined by these qualities. We are confined by the me, by the ego or the superego. But are you not saying that the seeing and the hearing that you describe sweeps away the ego and the me? Yes, but one has to be aware of the ego, the me that is interfering with the seeing, and to be aware without any choice is the seeing. The moment you choose what you want to hear, what you want to see, all the mischief of acting with a motive or with a desire or for pleasure begins. May I then ask you if it could be like this? One observes something, and one must at the same time observe all the action that immediately comes into play through the ego and through thought, so that one is seeing the objective thing and also the whole subjective mechanism in the mind all at once. Surely, surely. First of all, we don't see, we really don't hear. We hear and see with the limitation, the conditioning of the ego, of the me being the society, the fear, and so on. One must realize the fact that one does not see, one does not hear. When one recognizes that fact, you move to a different level. Trying to follow you through this, I am immediately aware of all these things. Are you suggesting that seeing them, as it were, in a mass, in a clump, as a fact, one then moves past them and is free of them? Or is it necessary to say, yes, I see this, this, and this? No, no. One must see it as a whole and put it away as a whole. The seeing it as a whole is the ending of it. But this is a very dangerous thing because the mind, caught in thought, is apt to say, yes, there is the factor of conditioning. There is the factor of thought. I see it, and not really see it. It takes it as a cipher. That is a pretension. That is a vanity of a sense of seeing. We have made it very clear that seeing or hearing is not possible when there is any interpretation, when there is any attachment. Yes, the quality of this is so totally other than what we do almost all of the time. And that's the end of chapter 1.